So most people approach body composition like a math problem, and they think it's more about the numbers than anything else, right? Calories in, calories out, hit your macros, be consistent. You hear that all the time. And technically, all of this advice is not wrong, but it is missing a huge piece of the puzzle. What actually allows for consistency to happen without constant mental effort, and importantly, without constant mental anguish? How can we stop burning out? That's the question that I'm going to answer today. By the way, if you've already seen on the board, the term food freedom is actually the answer. And I think that when people talk about food freedom, it's often automatically dismissed as like some kind of mental luxury that some people just feel and others don't. Or maybe they think that it's like some kind of like soft, vague therapy speak. The reality is that it's actually a set of learned practices that build towards something very concrete, which is nervous system regulation and the ability to make choices. Food freedom is a very unsexy subject because it's very hard to sell and there's no immediate visible gratification or physical outcome. The only way to sell food freedom is through longer term coaching applications and through like self-led courses and guides like this, by the way, which I made, which actually do work. So how do we define food freedom? I would say it is a felt sense of ease around all food choices, regardless of your nutritional goal, be it a caloric surplus, a caloric deficit, or even maintenance, which by the way is just existing in daily life. The goal of food freedom is not be calm all the time or eat whatever I want. It is not eat whatever I want, but rather to have the ability to move from feeling panicked in the face of food choices to feeling a lot calmer and a sense of ease. And when you're calm, you can actually make choices that align with your body composition, there it is, body composition goals and your long-term training goals, which are super important for your body composition goals. Also, hi, if it's your first time here, my name is Ash. I am a certified strength and conditioning specialist of over 8-ish years now, and I help clients and athletes with their fat loss and their body recomposition goals in a way that prioritizes their sanity and their happiness. So I spend a lot of time speaking with trainees about recovery, and they seem to have a basic understanding of what recovery means in the most basic sense, right? We've got sleep, nutrition, and time outside the gym. Now, as far as nutrition is concerned, they intellectually understand the importance of carbs, glycogen, about protein timing, and they know that underfueling impacts their performance. But it seems like there is often a big gap between the information that they know to be objectively true and their actual actions, such as the human condition. So what we often see sometimes instead is avoidance around many foods, even if they are convenient or liked. Sometimes we have a chronically low energy availability, which is masked as eating clean. By the way, low energy availability usually shows up as like inconsistent carbohydrate intake around training and underfueling earlier in the day, followed by very reactive overeating late at night, typically after their training session is over. And if you're like, okay, Ashley, so what? I'm getting the total daily calories I need anyways. What's the issue? Well, let's start with the most obvious surface level consequence of avoidance. Avoidance sounds harmless on paper. I just don't eat that. But in practice, it'll create a constant low-grade vigilance around food. So you're always scanning menus, you're always negotiating with yourself, you're always anticipating situations, and you're always trying to control outcomes that are not fully controllable. And I feel like that is really fucking stressful. And being in a repeatedly stressed state, even just a mild one, has real downstream effects on appetite regulation, decision-making, and ultimately consistency, which is what you claim to care about, at least when it comes to your training. And the more you avoid something like food out of fear, the scarier it becomes and the more stressful it is. And like I said, that's a miserable way to live. Again, we're not trying to feel in control. We are not trying to feel in control. This is not what we are doing. What we want is to feel a sense of ease, because the reality that most athletes and just people don't account for is that your life, unlike the gym, is not a controlled environment. The gym is the most controlled environment, the most constant calculated exposure to stress. Regular life is not that way, because you will go to spontaneous dinners. You will travel somewhere and have to endure some kind of exotic menu item. You will have to work long days at some point, and an office trail mix is just gonna have to suffice. And when that has to suffice, I don't want you to feel so crazy about it. The question is not how can I avoid these foods, but rather how can I navigate these choices without feeling imprisoned to what's ideal? And that is what food freedom grants you, the ability to move through life without so much mental exhaustion. Rigid dietary control, which is the opposite of food freedom, tends to lead to chronic dieting cycles as well. Okay, so actual caloric deficits. Caloric dieting, especially when it becomes cyclical, is not just some isolated behavioral issue. You see, repeated restriction across weeks, months, even years will increase your drive to eat through elevations in ghrelin, your hunger hormone, and reductions in leptin, which is your satiety hormone. It also increases your attentional bias and reward response to food cues. In plain English, you just become obsessed with food because it becomes so interesting to you. At the same time, metabolic adaptation lowers your resting energy expenditure and non-exercise activity. You move less subconsciously, which makes subsequent fat loss even harder and regain even faster and easier. This may come as a shock, but longitudinal research, which I can link below, shows that weight cycling and yo-yo dieting is actually associated with higher long-term body weight and fat mass. I know, it's interesting, right? The more you focus on something, the worse it becomes. These studies have found that individuals who repeatedly lose and regain the same weight tend to gain more weight over the years compared to those with stable patterns. How does this happen? Well, the post-diet phase for people who weight cycle is characterized by a really high amount of increased hunger, reduced satiety, and thus a higher caloric intake, which often overshoots the previous maintenance calories. If you want a real-life example of this, you can just look at the way that amateur and professional bodybuilders will often regain 10, 20, sometimes even 25 pounds in body weight a week after a physique show. Granted, a lot of that is food-water weight, but the higher caloric consumption usually will continue for several weeks, which causes a lot of body fat gain as well. I would say that that makes sense from a physiological standpoint, given that your body is trying very hard to get back to homeostasis. Had those individuals taken a much longer, more slower route, more level-headed strategy, the regain of weight would have been minimized. But they were competing for a show, so most likely they had a much shorter time frame. Rigid dietary control tends to produce what researchers call disinhibition. When your cognitive restraint breaks, your food intake does not simply return to baseline, like I said with those bodybuilders, it tends to exceed it. And this is why cycles of being good and being under control, we don't want that word, are followed by loss of control. If you grab on too tightly to something, it breaks. So the paradox is this: the people who try the hardest to control their intake through mentally restrictive dieting and morally coded good food, bad food language are often the ones who experience the least stability in both behavior and body composition. More effort does not equate better outcome. I would say that that's the case in most areas of life, and this is just another one of those examples. Food freedom, when done correctly, is not the removal of structure, nor is it, I eat whatever I want. It is the development of that regulatory capacity that allows for all food choices to exist without triggering some kind of compensatory response. I know I've repeated this multiple times by now, but I really want you to get this definition in your head because a lot of people do conflate it with eat whatever I want. And like I said, that can be very unhelpful for many people. The 5 necessary components of food freedom are trainable and changeable. First, for food freedom to exist, you must have caloric sufficiency for at least 3 months, if not 3+ months at a time, meaning you must stop the chronic caloric restriction and take long enough diet breaks. What is long enough? Well, that depends on the depth and the duration of your chronic restriction. The steeper the deficit was, the longer your break should be. The longer your deficit was, the longer your break should be as well. As far as day-to-day goes, you also need to stop chronically underfueling your training sessions. Chronic underfueling around your training sessions keeps your body in a state of perceived scarcity, which amplifies your hunger signals and food preoccupation. Eating earlier in the day, especially with enough carbohydrates, can help stabilize your hunger hormones so that you can actually focus on whatever needs to get done, and you'll just feel better and have more calories and energy for training. Win-win. If you want help with food freedom and your relationship with food, I have a course called Food Freedom Foundations set to release in July 2026, so be on the lookout for that. Second is to learn how to move away from all or nothing thinking. Knowing how to choose the second best option when the ideal one is unavailable will keep you sane and happy because, again, your life doesn't exist in a controlled setting. It's absolute chaos out there. You gotta just learn how to roll with the punches. Just because you have specific goals doesn't mean that you need to control every single variable, but just because you're not in ideal conditions doesn't mean that you can't make the second best choice. By the way, this is by far the hardest thing out of everything that I list. All or nothing thinking tends to permeate multiple parts of life, of your life specifically, and once you notice it, you'll start to really notice it and be like, oh shit, I do this all the time with so many things. And by the way, this is what I help 100% of my clients with, regardless of their goals, because we all fall into it sometimes. Third, to develop true food freedom, you need an interoceptive awareness of hunger. This is the ability to accurately interpret hunger, fullness, and craving signals. I would say that it is not innate for most people who have dieted extensively or for those who have been brought up by diet culture parents or diet culture people. If you need help with your hunger signals, I do have this free resource available in the link below. All right, so fourth, we have trigger food desensitization. When trigger foods are no longer restricted, their exaggerated reward value decreases over time. Desensitization is a pretty well-known psychological phenomenon. You can pretty much make anything uninteresting through repeated exposure. Obviously, this is not the case for every single thing, but for many people, doing so with foods can make desensitization happen. Common trigger foods involve items that are high in carbs and fats, like pastries, nut butters, candy, or foods that were not allowed in the house growing up. This is a big one for many of my athletes and clients. So, if you're watching this video, I highly recommend that you give your past a little think and try to recall if anything wasn't allowed in the house because it was bad for you. The most straightforward advice to give here is to start including small amounts of whatever it is that triggers you on a more frequent basis in a controlled setting. I want you guys to start small, include it in every single meal, as in breakfast, lunch, snack, dinner, make it boring for yourselves, and go from there. I should caveat that binge eating falls on the same continuum as overeating, and the line can be pretty blurry. So if this is something that you struggle with immensely, then you should go see a specialist about this. And I am not a binge eating specialist. I just want to make that super, super crystal clear. There are plenty of other contributors to food freedom, like body image, which I discuss in a separate video link below. This is an integral part of healing your relationship with food. And if you are someone who has suffered with bad body image in the past, like myself, then I highly recommend that you give that a watch. For the record, I don't think that any of the things that I listed just now are easy to accomplish, especially for women in diet culture. Each one of those 4 tasks can honestly take months to develop, sometimes even a lifetime, especially the one about making the second best choice. I myself have had to do a lot of practice with that in every single discipline in my life, and I'm sure that I have plenty left to go. You really just have to look at this whole process like you are training your body. Progress is always going to be small and incremental, and you will probably have setbacks at some point. If you are able to work towards food freedom, you will finally be able to find a body composition that is actually sustainable to you, that doesn't burn you out. I hope this was helpful. If this was helpful, please, please, please give me a thumbs up. It's gonna help me continue to create free content for you guys and hopefully help you with your nutrition goals. I will see you in the next one.